Coca-Cola wants you to think, hey man, I had 0 calories here, or Diet Coke, 0 calories, and the fats are gonna fall right off my abs. Calories in, calories out is only for closed models. We're an open system, so it's not calories. Your body does not care about calories. You don't want to lose weight, you want to lose fat. You cannot burn your own fat unless your insulin is low. And insulin is the mother hormone, the one that controls it all. Everybody else is suffragette. That's millions of dollars of false advertising to tell you that, hey, you're culpable. It's your fault. It's a math equation. It's not your fault.
Welcome back to the Metabolic Rebellion. I'm Kevin Bury, and I'm here today with my co-founder, physician, best-selling author, and my dear friend, Dr. Brent Brotzman. Thanks for joining us, Dr. B.
Hey, what's going on, Kevin? How's it going?
It is going well. Brent, you and I both are living through this once-in-a-lifetime winter storm, and we're hunkered down here in Austin, which is normally beautiful this time of year. We're just trying to stay warm and stay, out of harm's way with all the freezing rain that we've had. But today we're going to spend some time talking with our audience about one of the most misunderstood topics in our generation, right? And that is this ongoing conversation we've been having about how to lose weight the right way. So, over the last couple of episodes, we've been talking about this topic of losing weight the right way. And today we're going to give you a physiological alternative to calorie restriction diet, right? This isn't a trend diet. It's not a hack. It's certainly not about starvation, which we spent a lot of time talking about. Fasting and ketosis are the main subject we're going to be talking about today, and these are ancient tools that we can use for modern healing, right? So, Dr. B, are you ready to dispel some of your wisdom on us around fasting and ketosis?
Well, let's hope so.
Let's hope so. There you go. There you go. You got the energy. I like it. All right. So before we do that, I want to just give a little bit of a overview. We're going to do something different today, Dr. B. You and I've been planning this. We're going to put you on the hot seat, right? So in the second half of our show, we're going to ask you several rapid fire questions about losing weight the right way. Does that still okay with you? You're good to go
I
on the
like
hot
it.
seat?
In academics, we call this stump the chump. I like stump the chump.
We're gonna do, I think we're gonna coin that. It's gonna be stump the chump, stump the doc going forward. Actually, before we do that though, Dr. B, I wanna cover off, and I think this is a good segue in, right? I'd like us to debunk one of the things that I am hearing a lot, and a lot of our members and a lot of people ask me about, and that is what they hear an awful lot on TikTok and Instagram and YouTube. All of these influencers, all of these health coaches out there, and all of these fitness influencers who talk about, hey, the first thing you've got to know is you've got to be in a calorie deficit in order to lose weight. So I think this is a great place to start because, as we look back to the first two episodes we did on losing weight the right way, we talked about how eating less and moving more didn't work, which is really calorie restriction. And then we talked about GLP-1s, which is the turbocharge into calorie restriction. So why is it, Dr. B, that so many of these influencers are talking about calorie deficit as a requirement to be able to start to lose weight?
Well, first of all, you don't want to lose weight. You want to lose fat. And so what happens is if you're in a if you're restricting calories, if you're in a calorie restriction, a starvation, a yo-yo, a crash diet, all the things that haven't worked for 85 years, your body's going to say, "Hey, I don't have access to burning fat." So, and you're going to burn a lot of your lean body mass, which is, your lean tissue, which is your muscle, your organs, your bone, protein in your bone, and you're going to go into sarcopenia or frailty. So we don't want to lose weight. First of all, we want to lose fat. Secondly, the calories, restricting calories, is that's from the reason they're saying that that's millions of dollars of false advertising and misinformation from Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola wants you to live in the paradigm of, oh, it's calories in equals calories out. There's no bad calories. So Coca-Cola giving you a huge blood sugar spike, huge insulin spike, hyperinsulinemia, insulin resistance syndrome, increasing your risk of cancer, increasing your risk of obesity, increasing your risk of type 2 diabetes. It's not because of our big sugar bomb of 29 grams of sugar. It's because you're culpable because you're not doing this simple math equation. But here's the problem. calories in, calories out is only for closed models. So it works great, as we talked about, it works great in your physics lab, works great in a car battery. So it's not calories. Your body does not care about calories. The body physiologically is more the carbohydrate insulin model. If you're going to lose weight and it's going to be fat, you've got to trick your body into saying, "Hey, I've still got access to energy," because you may be 50 pounds overweight and have a lot of fat you want to burn. But if you've got restriction to the access of energy, then your body's not going to be able to burn it. It's going to go into panic mode and it's going to do some things you don't want to do.
So let's talk about that a little bit more. So you have said this many times. You to really understand fat loss, right? Not weight loss. To understand fat loss, you have to have access to burning your fat, right? In order to do that, you need to think about this thing differently. So why don't we talk about that? That's a good segue into fasting and ketosis.
So if you look at every miracle population, you look at the hunter gatherers that were metabolically flexible, that could go back and forth and burn fat and burn carbohydrates. They were hunter gatherer. If you look at all the centenarians of, the people who live to be 100, they all have a low insulin, low blood sugar. If you look at all the miracle populations of the blue zones, here's the deal. Let's retro it back. Let's say you're 45 pounds overweight, you got lots of energy stored, you'd like to get rid of it. That HSL has to be active. But the problem is insulin is the mothership. You got 50 hormones that are, and your hypothalamus controlling if you're hungry, if you're full, energy partitioning. Where am I going to store this as fat? Am I going to burn this off? And insulin is the mother hormone, the one that controls it all. Everybody else is subrogate. So if you want to burn your own fat, you have to have HSL. Well, if you have elevated insulin, it blocks HSL. You cannot burn your own fat. The average American, when our clients come to us and say, "Hey, I want to lose weight," the first thing we do is we get a fasting insulin level. We get an LPIR, which is insulin resistance, the most sensitive test. We get a HOMA IR, and we get some other lab work to see if they're in insulin resistance. And as we talked about, over 90% of Americans have insulin resistance, meaning elevated insulin levels. So your fasting insulin has to be 4 or less to burn your own fat. Okay. So that's the problem. So if you're eating a standard American diet and you cut 1,000 calories, but your insulin is still at 8, you're in lipogenesis. You can only put things away as fat. You cannot burn your own fat. So we have to lower your insulin to burn your fat.
Okay, so let's talk about that. So how does fasting help us lower our insulin levels?
When you're fasting or when you're doing time restricted feeding, when all you're taking is water, then basically your pancreas is not having to produce a ton of insulin in order to metabolize what, these high glycemic, high blood sugar spiking meals you're getting. So the pancreas can say, "Oh, okay, I can rest a little bit." And so it starts coming down during that period of time. So we're resting your pancreas, we're resting insulin, we're letting insulin come down.
Got it. And and by the way, when we talk about fasting, let's talk about the kind of the types of fasting, right? Because you've mentioned time restricted eating, you've talked about water fasting, and there are many different types of fasting out there. What are you talking about, and what are you suggesting when it comes to fasting? Because I know there are many different types of fasting out there.
Okay, well, the beauty of fasting is that's what we did as hunter gatherers. We were alpha predators at the time. We're omnivores. So you would kill a deer, you'd eat the fat and the protein, which did not spike your insulin. So when you eat fat, does not spike insulin. When you eat protein, very small spike. And then you'd wait 3 or 4 days, you'd be drinking water till your next deer. So your insulin level was low, it was 4, like all these other miracle populations. And then if you saw some berries, hunter gatherer seasonally, you'd see some berries, you'd pick the berries, they had protective fiber. Nobody stripped the fiber out or added sugars to it or put it in a blender. So you still, even though you had a little bit of a carbohydrate spike, your pancreas was not producing insulin. So that's the big difference between all the miracle populations. They don't have elevated levels of insulin, elevated levels of insulin causing insulin resistance. So that's what's nice about either time restricted feeding or fasting. And number two is because it's panicking, it says I cannot access my fat because HSL is blocked by high insulin. So now what else I got left? I got my muscle. So you go into gluconeogenesis and your body says, I'm going to burn. It's kind of like the analogy is you're trying to get better gas mileage in your engine by taking out parts of the engine, the important parts, right? So your body says, okay, I can't access the fat. I'm going to burn the amino acids through gluconeogenesis. So it burns your lean muscle mass, burns your muscle, burns your bone, burns your organs, burns your connective tissue. So now you're in double trouble because then what happens is down the line when you decide, hey, I'm not doing this caloric restriction, and you still, so now you're only burning 1,400 calories. Of course, anything when you go back to 2000, it's going to go up to, you're going to gain it back as fat, and you've skeletonized your skeleton. Your skeletal muscle is a longevity deal for you. You needed to get up out of the chair. You needed to be a glucose reservoir for you, and you eat a big carbohydrate meal. 70% of the glucose goes into muscle.
Yeah, so essentially what you're saying is when we think about, calorie restriction, and we live in a world that we have high insulin, because you've just talked about how the average American is somewhere, around 10 or higher in their fasting insulin. That really equates to a famine kind of physiology, right? Let's talk about how fasting is the opposite, because fasting, along with low insulin, gives you, I would guess, based on our previous conversations, fuel flexibility, right? So let's talk about how fasting, starts to give us more of that flexibility to be able to burn carbs or our own fat.
Right. So if the first way to get there is lowering your insulin, right? So how do you do to lower your insulin? It has nothing to do with calories, even though Coca-Cola would like you to say a piece of cake, a big huge sugar spike from a Coke from a piece of cake is the same as 100 calories of that is 100 calories of broccoli, right? So the first thing with our clients is we say, hey, we've got to lower your insulin. So what is the magic thing? The magic thing is the rapidity. You know, of course, there's three macros. There's protein, there's fat, there's carbohydrates. The guys you and I hang out with, there's a fourth one that's alcohol, but we're not going to talk about that one today. So, so we don't want to restrict your calories. We want to change your macros, and we're not anti-carbs. I'm okay with broccoli. I'm okay with an orange because it still has the protective fiber, slows down the glucose spike. But what we're doing for our clients is you cannot eat 6 times a day and have a giant blood sugar spike, insulin spike, and hypoglycemia, and you can't eat sugar sweetened beverages, ultra processed food that have added sugars and they've stripped away all the protective fiber. And the reason they've done that, there's a great study by Ludwig showing that kids who eat a high glycemic breakfast, they sit down to a nice Honey Nut Cheerios approved by the AHA, so great, American Heart Association. Big Honey Nut Cheerios and a glass of orange juice, get a high glycemic meal. They get a big blood sugar spike, a big insulin spike to cover it, and then 2 or 3 hours later, the insulin stays in your bloodstream longer than the spiking carbohydrate. Now you're hypoglycemic, you're hungrier. So those kids, within the next 5 hours, ate for lunch 81% more calories than the kids who had a low glycemic diet, which was, eggs and bacon or something protein. And so basically, they've designed it that way. So nobody's ever eaten 6 times a day. That's marketing. That's You're always in a fed state. That's elevated insulin. That's a problem with it down the cancer path and the obesity path. The standard American diet has all these super glycemic ups and downs because they want you to eat more on the next one. So the key is so it's not calorie restriction, it's modification of your macro. And we're not anti-carb. You can still have some broccoli if you want to. It can feed your your gut, your microbiome. But you can't have the ultra processed blood sugar spiking, insulin spiking food.
All right, Dr. B. So that's a good understanding of some of the challenges of the current diet. So let's talk about fasting versus kind of the normal standard American diet, and what are some of the differences and what are some of the kind of mechanics of how that would look for somebody.
Right. Well, because our hunter gatherers were fasting, in between 2 or 3 days, and then a lot of the societies are eating twice a day. With fasting, what happens is your body's not, hey, I'm in starvation mode. It's I'm in between meals. So with fasting, when you have a insulin level of 4 and you're fasting, you're just drinking water, your body doesn't panic and go into adaptive thermogenesis and try to ratchet down, your burn rate, and it doesn't start eating your skeletal muscle. Instead, it says, hey, okay, I got to be bright and alert and ready for the next year. So basically, when you start a water fast or you're doing intermittent fasting, what happens is you get a big uptick in counter-regulatory hormones. Your growth hormone pops in and epinephrine pops in. So your resting metabolic rate, if you're burning 2,000 calories, it actually goes up. You're burning 2,200 calories because of these counter-regulatory hormones. And also your body says, "Hey, I got Brotzman, I got 10,000 calories I can access right here from you because the insulin's not blocking it." So you don't go into, ratchet down into adaptive thermogenesis. So fasting's beautiful because you don't have an elevated, the key is you don't have an elevated insulin, so you're not blocking the ability to burn your own fat. And then you're also not ratcheting down your resting metabolic rate, like when your body says, "I can't access your fat because it's blocked."
Yeah. So I want to double click on something you said just a minute ago, Ryan. I think it's fascinating because I think this is a misunderstanding, and maybe it's a preconceived notion that when I fast I'm going to have less energy, which you just said is not the case. I'd like to really click on that because I think people think of I'm going to, even though we just talked about you don't want to be in a starvation diet, right? And that cutting calories is a bad thing, um, that fasting equates to starving, right? And that I'm
That's
not.
what I always thought too. That's the way they kinda make it sound when they're giving you the energy realm.
Let's talk about that. Let's
Yeah.
talk about how, because you just said you actually start to burn more and your energy increases. So I think that's fascinating, and our listeners would probably want to learn more about that.
It's fascinating, like, when I started doing my first intermittent fasting or time restricted feeding or fasting, which, it's just the difference of the amount of time that you're water fasting. So, are you skipping breakfast? Are you skipping dinner? Or are you doing a 1-day fast or 2-day fast? I thought, "Oh my gosh, I'm gonna feel all grumpy and irritable." But I was on the, what everybody else is on, I was on the carbohydrate, I'm eating the standard American diet beforehand. So I've got a big spike, I feel great. Then I'm hypoglycemic, I feel horrible. And then I'm gonna eat a muffin, I feel great. So I was on this. What happens when you're fasting, it's kind of the same thing as when you're on when you're eating more ketogenic. Yeah, it's weird. You have this kind of a clarity, first, 2 or 3 hours you're kind of freaked out. You have a clarity and mentally you feel great and your energy level's good and you're like, wow, okay, this is pretty good. And then you got to watch it. Some people will do too much fasting. And again, you don't want to go so long in the fast that eventually your body says, okay, I don't have enough energy at this point. So, we do it within framework. So, intermittent fasting, time restricted feeding, all those are just words for basically you're not taking in a bunch of blood sugar spiking carbs in our current diet. You're able to burn you're metabolically flexible.
And so what's the science? I know you love to go deep in the science. What's the science behind why your energy increases for those of our listeners that want to know, like what actually happens inside their body to give them that additional energy?
Yeah, that's the kind of regulatory hormones. That's growth hormone, makes you feel great. Epinephrine makes you feel great, and just not having a lot of the kids on these glucose spikes up and down blood glucose and the hypoglycemic side of it. They're diagnosed with ADHD and all that. But that's when you and I are hangry or we feel irritable. But for a kid, it's hard to concentrate. So there's a lot of studies out there, and you'll see a lot of literature. There's 2 or 3 really good websites on it if the listeners want to.
And you say it's just kids, it's not kids, it's also adults, as we both know, because a lot of our members are struggling with those very same things, and it's not because they're having, psychological issues, it's because they're having, insulin reactions to all the food that they're taking in.
Yeah, when you're hypoglycemic 3 hours after you get a big spike and your insulin's still there and you have no blood sugar, you're like, man, something's wrong. I'm inattentive. I can't concentrate. I'm hungry. I'm angry. I'm just, I'm pissed off. I think, everybody can relate to that to some degree.
Absolutely. Okay, so I want to now move on to the next topic that you touched on a minute ago. I think one of the most misunderstood terms in dieting is this idea of ketogenic, right? I think people think, oh my God, I am essentially going to starve myself, right? Ketogenic means I got to have less food, right? And so I think there's a lot of preconceived notions about what being ketogenic is, how it works. And so why don't we take just a minute and talk about what ketosis is, because I know I was surprised when I learned what it actually meant and what the science and what is going on in your body. So why don't we talk about that for a minute, and then we'll move on to, how you start to move into some repair mode as you're doing some of these fasting and fast mimicking types of practices.
Yeah, ketogenesis. A lot of times you'll hear when people are referring back to the 2 million years of hunter-gatherer, they say it's the paleo diet, it's the carnivore diet, it's the ketogenic diet. Basically, ketosis is just this. It's metabolic flexibility. So again, the healthy miracle populations, our ancestors, we looked at the teeth of the bacteria. When you're in ketosis, you don't have the same bacterial flora. You don't have cavities, like a lion or alpha predator doesn't have cavities because they're in ketosis. Here's what goes on in ketosis. Your insulin level is 4. You can go back and forth, burn your fat or burn the carbs around you, whatever it is. But after a while, your body starts burning enough of its own fat. The liver says, "Okay, I'm going to convert this into ketones." And ketones are wonderful. Ketones do great things. There's an article that we just gave to our members from the PNAS that shows that insulin resistance starts in your 40s, Alzheimer's, some of the dementia associated with diabetes, and some of these other cognitive dysfunctions. They showed through 19,000 of these functional MRIs that it's insulin resistance syndrome of the brain. They call it type 3 diabetes, and it comprises about 80% of folks with Alzheimer's have insulin resistance, elevated insulin resistance, and they were either pre-diabetic or diabetic, type 2 diabetic. So they showed in this really cool study, they looked at these 19,000 folks, and they showed in their 40s they started getting the precursor, the insulin resistance, and the hypo, not enough glucose in the brain cells. And they showed what they took 100 of them and they gave them ketones, and it goes into a different pathway into your brain cell, into the MCT receptor into the brain cell, and kind of saves your brain cells and lit them back up on the functional MRIs. So it's an alternative pathway for folks that are having neurodegenerative issues. Thomas Seyfried has shown with the metabolic theories on cancer that a lot, if not all, cancer cells cannot grow on ketones. So if you're in ketosis, cancer cells have lost their mitochondria, so they can only grow on glutamine or glucose. So if you're in ketosis, it requires mitochondria to burn ketones, and so you've lost your mitochondria in the cancer cells.
That's phenomenal, and we're going to talk much more about cancer and how we can help, and your diet can help address some of those things and help you avoid that stuff in a future episode. There was one term that you mentioned just a minute ago, Dr. B. I just want to double click on real quickly for our listeners, and that is MCT. Right? You talked about that's an alternative pathway into the brain. So MCT, I know what it means. Why don't you tell our listeners what
Yeah,
MCT?
this isn't even a different. This is two different MCTs. I got you off track. Sorry about that. Okay, so that's an alternative. That's a backdoor when you're. What happens is with a lot of these dementias, and about 80% of folks with Alzheimer's, is you get so much insulin going that you get down regulation of the receptors for insulin, and so it's like a bartender says, "Hey, too many patrons in the bar, so you don't get enough glucose in." And there's a MCT pathway that the backdoor through your mitochondria into the brain that the ketones can go. What you're talking about is MCT oil. That's medium chain triglycerides, and yeah, that's good stuff too. That also helps. It gives you a little more direct. I've got some of that. I won't say it's nasty, but it's oily. I've got some of that in my little repertoire right now. So MCT, medium chain triglycerides, you put that in, it helps augment the ketosis. So if you're monitoring, you can either be in endogenous ketosis yourself, or you can take exogenous ketones, or you can take, like supplements, or the MCT oil, and give you a faster, more accelerated pathway into some of the ketone production.
Got it. Okay. So I want to move on now to another topic that you brought up a few minutes ago. I want to give you a chance to explain a little bit more. You talked about how when we're in ketosis that and using fasting to help us get there, that your cells can repair themselves. Let's double click on that one for a minute because I think that's I'm starting to see more and more people talking about this, and I think it's a really important topic, especially for people who are in insulin resistance to be able to start your their bodies to heal themselves.
Yeah, that's autophagy. There's tons of different things about autophagy. There's mitophagy of your mitochondria. Basically, it's the ability for your cells to kind of repair themselves. So what happens is one of the huge, so when we're talking about weight loss, we're like, okay, never before has everybody been in a constant fed state 6 times a day. That's marketing that no healthy society's been that way. And the reason that's a problem, they say, "Oh, it's gonna bump up your metabolic rate." Well, that's not what happens. So if you have insulin all day long, insulin has many qualities. One of them is it's a growth. It's it's anabolic. It grows things. You're getting growth, 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 then you get abnormal growth, and that's cancer. So autophagy is when you're fasting, you don't have the cells aren't getting the continual over stimulation of growth, and so they get to rest. Okay, I'm not in growth mode, and so I can get some of my organelles and I can repair them, and then I'm ready. Because if you're in constant growth mode, tons of studies on this, nothing I've come up with, showing you that basically, that's an increased risk for abnormal cell growth, which is the precursor to cancer.
Which we know is fed by insulin and glutamine. So that's great. Okay, let's move forward. So we've talked a lot about this, and that's good. Let's talk about what fasting is not, right? So I think there again, and I mentioned this a second ago, or a few minutes ago rather, about people have preconceived notions about fasting. Oh my gosh, I'm not going to have any energy, and how am I going to get through my day? So let's talk about what fasting isn't.
Yeah, it's not starvation mode. Starvation is how your body perceives a caloric deficit. But once you get, once you try fasting, I mean, breakfast is fasting. But in theory, if you just skip breakfast, and so now you've extended your fast, instead of having a breakfast or break a fast, you extend it through there or drink some coffee, then that's good. Then you've given you some more time, that you're going to be, undergoing autophagy, and yet you're not slowing down your metabolic rate, and your body's not panicking and try to burn your muscle. So yeah, and you still feel good. And then when you're hungry, then you eat, a non huge blood sugar spiking, insulin spiking carb. You eat protein and fat.
Well, let's talk about that. That's a great segue into, part of what we talk about the Opti protocol or the Purple Zone, which is a book you're working on right now, and that is, talking about like once I come back from a fast, when I start to introduce foods again, what should we be eating? What should our listeners be eating? Because you just said it can't be a insulin spiking diet. So what kind of things should they be eating, and what is the sequence of those?
We do not want you to restrict calories. We just don't want you to eat carbohydrates that are super blood sugar spiking. So we do not want caloric restriction, but we like it in 2 or 3 meals a day rather than six small meals. So we like to keep your insulin levels at where you're metabolically flexible. You can go back and forth and burn your fat, be thin, burn your abdominal fat, your visceral fat, which is a big multiplier of cytokines and inflammatory deals. So basically, when you come back from your fasting, I want you eating lots of protein and lots of healthy omega-3 fat. So that's, I do a lot of sushi, check my mercury levels periodically. But it's always funny to me, like, oh, people are like, oh, don't eat fat, go low fat. But then when you're at the sushi place, like, well, these are the best fats. Like, okay, there's a disconnect here. But so you want to eat ocean caught fish because the plankton are omega-3. You want to eat grass-fed beef because that's the good omega-3. So lots of good healthy fat and lots of good healthy protein. You can eat some carbohydrates, but just not. We like to kind of convert our guys initially into a ketogenic diet if they really need it. If they really have high insulin resistance going on, which is the big risk factor or number one risk factor for the top 10 causes of death, minus trauma. So if they're in really bad shape, we'll start them in a ketogenic diet. Otherwise, they can go low carb, and the carbs are fine, as long as it's broccoli or asparagus or an orange. But that's why, when we show these studies on sugar sweetened beverages, how they increase your obesity rate, your type 2 diabetes rate, your obesity related cancer rate, we don't want rapidly blood sugar spiking carbohydrates. And we want we want you to eat 2 or 3 times a day, not 6 times a day. We want to turn off your insulin, and think it's some autophagy.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of goodness there. Okay, so I think you've done a good job of laying kind of the foundation, right? So we've over the last couple of podcast episodes, we've talked about why a calorie restriction isn't the right thing, and we've certainly reinforced that today, and that GLP-1s just turbocharge you into calorie restriction. And now we've talked about what your body really needs and how ketosis is the actual burning of fat, and that's an important switch for your body. So,
If you're fat, you cannot burn your own fat unless your insulin is low, correct?
exactly. Okay, so that's a great foundation. Now, I think that's a good transition point to move you onto the hot seat, right? So, we have captured a bunch of questions from our members, from prospective members, people reaching out directly to us, and I just want you to give a quick response to these questions because I think these are questions that people are directly asking us, right? We have shortened them down in the spirit of trying to get through them. We've got about I guess about 15 to 20 questions depending on time here. So let's jump right in, right? So first one is, do calories matter?
Only if you're a bomb calorimeter, a high school physics professor, or a car battery or a steam engine. That's the first law of thermodynamics. Only applies to closed system. Phone your high school physics teacher and say, "Hey, Brotzman says we're an open system. That calories don't have crap to do with the beautiful open system that we are. That's hormonally based with 50 hormones and a hypothalamus." So
Got it. Okay. Is a deficit required to lose fat?
no, a change in venue. A change in your frequency of eating, a change in your insulin spiking, and also less omega 6s, but just a change. You do not want to, if you restrict calories and your body says, I don't have access to the fat, it's going to go into adaptive thermogenesis and slow down your metabolic rate, and it's going to eat your protein because it thinks it's starving. So
Why do people plateau?
that's adaptive thermogenesis. What happened again? If it was calories in, calories out, and you're burning, you're eating 500 calories less a day, 7 days a week. If it was really truly a physics math problem and a closed system, then you go to 0 pounds in X number of weeks, right? But what happens is your body, if you're doing a caloric restriction diet, which is not what we're doing, not what you're supposed to do, the body says, I don't have access to my energy. I'm in starvation mode. There's no gazelles down at the watering hole. I gotta lower what I'm burning, and I'm gonna start eating my own muscle, which is metabolically active. So what happens is the plateau comes somewhere between 2 to 6 weeks, and it's because your body's ratcheting down. Your hypothalamus tells your thyroid T3 to go down. Your body temperature goes down, your resting metabolic rate goes down. That's why everybody plateaus on a caloric restriction diet in 2 to 6 weeks.
Okay, I love this next one. So counterintuitive. Can I really lose weight while eating more?
Yes, a lot of these populations. You look at the Maasai back before the Coca-Cola truck showed up over in Africa. Those guys were eating 3,500 calories a day. It was cow's meat, milk, blood. I mean, it's like 80% saturated, and they're healthy as a horse. They have none of the top 10 causes of mortality. We have no problem with atherosclerosis because it's oxidized LDL. It's not LDL. It's oxidized.
So, since we talked about ketosis and ketogenic diets, is keto safe long term for people?
Only for 2 million years of your ancestors. Yes.
Here's a good one that comes up quite frequently. Is red meat bad for you?
No. You want it to be the only premise now, we like to tell our opti folks, you want to mimic, your Gigi mom six generations ago before ultra processed food had a 1.2% obesity rate. She had no type 2 diabetes. She had 5% cancer rate. And so everything, we go down the whole list. But back then, so we say we want you to mimic her diet. It's a whole foods diet. We want you eating omega-3. The only problem now is it's got to be grass-fed beef, because lots of times the way if you have an Argentinian grass-fed cow, takes 18 months to go to slaughter. But if you give them a bunch of the stuff that they're giving us, the omega-6 and the soy and all that, they can slaughter them in 6 months instead of 18 months because they go into insulin resistance and really get fat quickly. So you don't want that. You don't want corn fed. You want grass fed red meat.
And same thing with pasture raised eggs and chicken
Yeah.
and things like that. Yeah, that all makes
Yeah,
sense.
you want omega-3 propensity, not omega-6.
Yeah. All right. I want to shift gears now and talk about several questions that came in about fasting itself and some specifics around breaking fast. So first of all, does coffee break a fast?
No, unless you're like my wife, who I sometimes catch putting like the frappe double, don't put sugar in it. Black coffee, black
Black
coffee.
coffee does not. Okay. Similarly, this is one that comes up quite often. Does a diet soda break a fast?
Yes, it does. Because Coca-Cola wants you to think, hey man, I had 0 calories here, or Diet Coke 0 calories, and the fats are gonna fall right off my abs. But what happens is if you look at all these studies on the increased mortality, increased type 2 diabetes, all that from Coke and all these soft drinks as well as orange juice and that kind of stuff. But also diet drinks have the same problem because artificially sugars sweeten, like Coke, Diet Pepsi, they still give you the cephalic phase. Your tongue says, "Hey, here comes sugar," and it bumps up your insulin level in preparation. So you may not be giving it a bunch of sugar, but you still have elevated insulin. And as you know, elevated insulin is blocking your ability to burn fat.
Exactly. Okay. How about electrolytes? Do they break a fast?
No,
Okay.
just make sure your electrolytes don't have, "Oh, yeah, we've got some really good tasting, it tastes like lemon lime, but it's got 60 calories of sugar in
Yeah,
it."
exactly. Exactly. Okay. What do you recommend is the best fasting window for beginners?
Ooh, that's a hard one. In theory, you're supposed to kind of stop eating. You should eat breakfast, eat lunch, if you're going to eat 2 or 3 meals, and then stop eating at 3 o'clock. But for beginners and for me, that takes out the social component of eating dinner with the family.
Family, yeah.
So I'd say just start skipping breakfast and just, start out with a limited eating window of your 2 meals or 3 meals within 8 hours, and then make sure you stop, 2 or 3 hours before
Yeah.
bedtime.
And I would add to that that you got to cut out the between meal snacks, right? We got to get you to
Because the snack's gonna bump up your insulin, we want you to have, kind of a clear palate between them. We want insulin coming back down.
right. Okay, I want to go back and revisit episode 2 and give you a chance since this is our third episode on this losing weight the right way. A few questions from episode 2 here, which was your call on GLP-1 as the miracle drug to help you lose weight. Do you believe GLP-1s are a good idea?
No, unless you like double the mortality rate and about 6 or 7 times the increased loss of independence later on. Basically, it's a starvation diet that is turbocharged. I mean, you get really effective caloric restriction. You hit the dopamine with the caloric restriction dopamine pathway, and you slow down the GI motility, and so you have a great caloric restriction. The problem is the 1,000 calories you're still eating are the standard American diet. Still, you can't access your own fat. You can't burn it with HSL. So now they're already showing it on the DEXAs. These folks are coming, that's 60, 70% in some of these drugs of the weight loss is your lean muscle mass. It's your critical muscle, bone, organ. And so that's weight loss, but that's, strength and muscle mass are one of the biggest keys to longevity. So you're accelerating your mortality rate.
Yeah, in fact, just before our recording, I got a note from a friend in New York who said they just finished watching our episode on GLP-1s, and he was reminded of one of his dear friend's wife who had been on a GLP-1 for a year, and she had lost a lot of her muscle mass, and now she's really struggling with that, and she's suffering from from depression and things like that. So it's very real the side effects of GLP-1s. Okay. Um,
As I tell you, as an orthopedic surgeon for 30 years and operating on people that, are sarcopenic, frail, and then they become osteosarcopenic and they lose all the structure in their bones and they fall and break their hip, and the mortality rates after hip fractures are horrible. So, that's just with the standard, what happens to folks over with aging. So you can imagine how worrisome that is to me to see folks accelerating and turbocharging that same sarcopenic pathway.
Yeah, especially in their 20s, 30s, and 40s, right?
Right, yeah, somebody in their 30s who's losing, so much muscle mass in a short period of time, right?
Exactly. Okay, so now I want to move on to the last of the three questions that we've gathered from our audience.
Kind of, these aren't too bad.
No, they're not. They're not. Okay.
Uh,
What would you say is the biggest mistake people make while trying to lose weight?
I'd say calorie restriction. I mean, it's just so drilled into us. I mean, and millions of dollars of marketing to tell you that, hey, you're culpable. It's your fault. It's a math equation. It's not your fault. Your body is an anti-starvation machine for 2 million years, and so you cannot send it the signal that, hey, I'm cutting calories or I'm cutting the energy to you, and then but you don't have the ability to access energy from the stores, which is what's happening. Like I said, 90% of Americans have elevated insulin above what it's when you have elevated insulin, you're in lipogenesis. It means you can only store stuff as fat. You cannot burn fat. So, we were all just so indoctrinated by the multi-million dollar campaigns of, hey, 100 calories of Coke is equal to 100 calories of broccoli, or, eat less, move more. Well, if you eat less and move more, then you're going into adaptive thermogenesis and slow down your metabolic rate.
Yeah, so that's exactly right, which is a good segue to the last one, which is Dr. B, you talk a lot about strength training going along with losing weight. Can I lose weight without strength training?
It'd be hard, and you shouldn't want to. I mean, your muscle. I mean, this is I think if you take 20 guys like me in the room that are all worried about your longevity and your health span, which is the time before chronic disease, I think every one of us would agree that having good strength and good muscle mass is so critically important for longevity, for quality of life. And one of the other things we tell our members that, if you eat a meal with some carbs, make sure and get up and walk out within a few minutes, because 70% of the extra glucose or the blood sugar in your after a meal can be absorbed up in your muscles. So the more muscles you have, the better of a glucose or blood sugar reservoir you have. So that's wonderful. That's keeping you from having insulin resistance syndrome, which is deadly. And it keeps you from falling and having Dr. Brotzman fix your hip. And it lets you get up out of the chair, lift the grandkid, and go to Machu Picchu. So yeah. So I was my whole life I was a before I started, doing the deep research, I was a calories in, calories out guy. And so I was a big endurance athlete, and I didn't care that much about, I'm a tennis player. Roger Federer, he's kind of skinny, so I wasn't too worried about weight training. Now you and I are weight training. We're in the gym doing that. Turns out resistance training is a lot more critical. That and HIIT, high intensity interval training, are a lot more critical than than I thought. I thought it was all about burning calories.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, listen, Dr. B, this was good. This was thank you for today. I'm going to do a quick recap. So, like the first two that we did on losing weight the right way, I hope today's episode is going to open a lot of people's eyes, change a lot of minds, and potentially save our viewers a lot of problems in the future, right? So, the bottom line of this three-part series, first of all, calories are not the enemy, all right? Insulin is the gatekeeper. You have reinforced that point over and over and over again. Unfortunately, GLP-1s are not the miracle drug they're purported to be. They are starvation by injection, right? They're a turbocharged calorie restriction diet, as you've talked about. And fasting isn't deprivation. It's not starving yourself. It's really about repair and giving your body what it needs, the ability to burn its own fat, which is by definition what ketosis is. So thank you for all that. I'm gonna go ahead and wrap it up and talk directly to our viewers here. We hope that our conversation today gave you pause, right? Hope it opened your eyes. We're here to try and help educate you on what your body really needs, right? To support that, we've created two free ebooks that you can use to help answer some of your questions on how to lose weight the right way. The first is called Starving for Nothing, While Eating Less and Moving More is the Biggest Nutritional Lie of Our Time. And then the second one, we referenced this in the last episode, is the Fast Track to Frailty, the hidden health cost of GLP-1 weight loss drugs. You can download both those for free at Opti Metabolics. We'll also include a link in the show notes here. These are written with no hype and no fear. It's just clear easy to understand truth. Dr. B wrote these about, very important topics relating to how to lose weight the right way, right? This is one of the most important topics that we hear from our members and prospective members. They're all curious about this. And so, we would ask if this episode was valuable for you to share it with someone you care about, right? Give us a like, leave a review. We love your reviews. In fact, that's where we got a lot of the questions for tonight's episode. So please do that. Subscribe so you don't miss what's coming up. This was our part 3 of, the 3-part series. In the next episode, which is one that Dr. B has been talking about for weeks now, we're going to tackle how oils that were once used to lubricate naval vessels, that's exactly the case, naval vessels became a staple in today's modern diet. So until next time, keep questioning the rules. The Metabolic Rebellion will continue.